Our guest today has over 20 years experience in health and wellness. She's a chaplain in the Buddhist tradition and author of From Grief to Growth, 5 Essential Elements of Action to Give Grief a Purpose and Grow from Your Experience. You're going to love our conversation with Paula Stephens. You're connected with the Heart of Hospice. I'm Jerry Fenter here with Helen Bauer.
Whether you're a family caregiver or an end-of-life professional, we're here to enhance your hospice experience by connecting you with information you can use about end-of-life care. This episode of the Heart of Hospice podcast is brought to you by Hospice of Southern Maine. As the leading nonprofit hospice provider in Maine, Hospice of Southern Maine is committed to high-quality patient care and providing professional and community education as well as grief support to the counties they serve. Hospice of Southern Maine provides compassionate care through end of life for patients with life-limiting illness and support for their families in the comfort of wherever they call home. Connect with Hospice of Southern Maine on Facebook, Instagram, or hospiceofsouthernmaine.org.
I have to tell you, I have really enjoyed the possibility of having a chaplain on the podcast.
Oh my goodness.
No, it's great. And what a...
It's okay.
It's okay. Stop it.
It's not the same as having a nurse.
It's about time we had a chaplain. And what a perfect person to be that person who is the chaplain on our podcast.
That's true.
Paula Stephens has got such a presence.
An energy.
Yeah, an energy that she just, it comes across as so much joy and love and just grace. And
remember I said it's like she's got a flow.
She does. She absolutely does. And it's awesome. It's awesome. So you, our listeners, are going to love hearing from Paula Stephens. She has so much to say, not only to chaplains, but to everybody on the team, and an expression of how to help each other in the team.
Paula Stephens has over 20 years in health and wellness. She has a master's degree in exercise physiology. She is also a certified wellness coach and mindfulness teacher. The bigger this gets, the smaller I feel intellectually. She's got some great credentials. She is a yoga teacher, a clinical hypnotherapist, and a hospital and hospice chaplain in the Buddhist tradition. She's worked with hundreds of caregivers. An amazing lady. She is an inspirational speaker on the topic of personal growth, resilience, and grief. We're just captivated by this lady.
So in this interview, she's going to talk about mindfulness, and she's going to also talk about what's called the grace concept. And this is a great opportunity to hear what grace, Grace, is really all about. And we're looking forward to sharing this with you. So here is our interview with Paula Stephens. Paula, we are so glad to have you on the Heart of Hospice podcast. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you. And I am so excited to be here and have this conversation.
So tell us, how did you make this jump from being a health and wellness coach, a yoga instructor, to being in hospice chaplaincy? How did you do that?
And you're exactly right. There seems to be no connection between the two. I think if you look at it just in those ways, but and you're exactly right. Like my background is in health and wellness, and I had a very deep career there. And so there was a few steps between health and wellness and then actual hospital chaplaincy. But I would say that, the big connector was really realizing, as someone who has worked in the world of wellness and mind-body connection, that so much of our experiences are lived in the body. And even though I always looked at it more through the lens of a scientific physiological standpoint, when I shifted that focus to be, how are we experiencing our emotions through the body? That became the connector of, when we're working with people at end of life and their families in particular, is how are they experiencing this in their body? And sometimes it's through nervousness, or it could be through a sense of, having an upset stomach or tension. and working with that and giving them some things that I learned through my wellness experience about using the breath to calm the body, tapping into what they're feeling in order to give it language, even if the language is like a sound or a word that describes, tension, tightness, a lump in my throat. Like, so in a lot of ways, there really is this beautiful connection between working in chaplaincy and wellness, because it's really about our embodied experience.
Being a chaplain myself, I'm very intrigued by this and love the idea of getting people to have that mind-body connection, because that's really important for them to be able to do that. And your background seems to work perfectly for the career that you have now. That's awesome.
I think it's more difficult for nurses to get to that point because, we're all about a physical manifestation. We get that. We understand it. We're trained to deal with it. And there's a med for that, right? We can get it in you, on you, jabbed into you, we can figure it out. But when you talk about this connection, I think of, especially the word tension, we talk about tension headaches. That's a physical manifestation, a painful manifestation of tension, emotion, and then gut reaction, which is a real physical manifestation. People actually have that. So I think it's good for nurses to be reminded by the spiritual counselors and the chaplaincy teams that there is a connection that can't be severed, and you can't just discount the spiritual and emotional part of things when you're looking at how the physical symptoms work.
Mm-hmm. Just to add a little piece to what you're saying, because it's such a good observation around our different roles, right? Like the role of the nurse, the role of the chaplain, the role of the family, right? The role of the patient. And I think one of the beautiful connections that we could make here is, that sometimes we don't have to fix the symptoms. We don't have to fix what's coming up, but what might be helpful and is even, we could even call it a prescription, is to say, what does this feel like? Or what's the sound? What's the expression? And have you ever felt like that before? Or how was it when you felt it before? So if they come in to sit with their loved one who's dying and they, are saying, oh my gosh, like I really have this headache, or my stomach is so upset today, and then you can follow up with them and say, how is your stomach today? Or how are you feeling? And is it different today for you to be here? And because then it helps them identify their own progress, their own experience of what's happening. And it kind of gives it a little more texture.
I like that idea. Some biofeedback, if that's the right term.
Yeah.
So tell our listeners about your book, From Grief to Growth, and tell us a little bit of the background as well, the events that prompted you to write the book.
Yeah. So that really, in some ways, ties into your first question about how did I make this leap from wellness to chaplaincy?
Okay.
And then how did I make the leap into being the author of a book? Because honestly, don't tell anyone this, but I flunked freshman English. So I am like the last person who should be writing a book. This was never my life plan. It wasn't like I set out and thought I'm going to grow up and be an author. I'm going to be the next Mary Oliver or something, right? But I love to tell the story about how the book sort of was born into the world. And so I'll start with, so I had this career in the wellness industry, and I was teaching in higher education and loved what I did. Like I loved everything about the work that I was doing. And then in 2010, my oldest son passed away. He was in the Army and he was home on leave, and he died very unexpectedly. And that really pulled the rug out from underneath me. As anyone who's lost a loved one will tell you, that these unexpected losses, and even when they're expected, but there's so many flavors of this. But for me, the flavor it was this huge chasm that I just didn't feel like I could build a bridge from what was my life and what is my life. And I remember, and I actually talk about this in the book, after the funeral, after people had gone home, my husband was working nights at the time. He was in law enforcement. And I remember being alone at night, sitting in my bed and opening my computer and being like, okay, I'm going to figure this out. And now, as funny as this next statement is going to sound, being someone who worked in wellness and I was always a runner. And so I was used to like training plans, right? And so I literally Googled like training plan for grief because like that was my frame of reference, right?
Right.
So we come into these experiences with the experiences that we have and the tools that we have at our disposal. So my tool was, I bet there's a training plan. I bet there's 12 weeks and I'm going to have this, like, I'm going to figure this out. Turns out, I know you're not surprised, but I will just confirm for you, there is no training plan. There is, but there isn't, right?
Yeah.
And it certainly is not a 12-week program, as I was so hoping. But one thing that I learned was that it was going to be difficult. And as a person who lost a child, a lot of what was on the internet wasn't positive, was not hopeful. And I sat with that. Like, I was like, okay, then that is the prescription. The prescription is, this is awful. You're never going to get over it. Just be with it. Like, your life will not get better. And that was what came up on my Google search, right? And then over time, I realized that my wellness tools were useful. And I use them to move my body. And sometimes, you can't cry and run. That's what I learned. Sometimes it was running, sometimes it was crying, but it was never both. But both were therapeutic and both served a purpose. And so over time, and I wrote an article. I did start writing just as a way to process this experience. And it was very cathartic for me to write. And so I began blogging, and I wrote a blog for this online organization called Mind, Body, Green. And it was called The 5 Things I Wish People Knew About Losing a Child. And it went viral. Even today, I get requests to share it. I get requests for people to use it in their, to send out to their communities. And so from there, I started this sort of community developed. And so this was maybe 2 or 3 years after Brandon died. So 5 years out from Brandon's loss, I had this pretty robust online community of mostly bereaved parents. And I decided that I would, in 5 weeks, now we would call it a Zoom call. Now, this was before Zoom was as much of a part of our life as it is now, but it was like a conference call. And I said, each week for 5 weeks, I'm going to share one tool that really has helped me in 5 years. So 5 years, 5 tools, this in no order or anything. It was just like, when I looked back, these were the 5. And so each week it was a little bit of me talking about my experience. And then the community would just discuss what that was like for them. So by the end of it, I had all of it transcribed, thinking I would just turn them all into blog posts. And a friend of mine said, wow, like, it's like 50,000 words. Like, this is a book. And I was like, oh, well, in that case, let's just, right. So let's just have it edited and put into a book. So the book was really spoken into existence. I mean, obviously, it was edited and there was a lot of things that happened after that, but it was not like, I didn't do that thinking this is the framework for a book. That was just how it unfolded. And so I just self-published the book because for me, it was just put it out and make it super accessible and not go through a bunch of hoops or do anything, but just put something out into the world that seems useful in whatever way, whatever tool. And so it's the 5 things in 5 years was really the basis for it. So that kind of, I think, ties together, like, how did I go from wellness to hospital chaplaincy is a personal experience of loss that really created a chasm in my life. And then that was how the book came to be. I just spoke it into existence.
Well, for someone who wasn't an English major, as you said, that sounds like you did pretty well with this book.
It was a wonderful experience. And for me, as soon as it got published, there was this real, like, a palpable shift of just feeling, in the language of like meaning making. Like, for me, there was a lot of meaning making in that. And it was like sitting with like comfort food and like sitting back and saying, okay, like, this feels like meaning to me.
That's exactly what David Kessler, if you know David Kessler that worked with Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, that's his book. And he too lost a child.
Yes.
Yes. And I think that with his book that he wrote,
Finding Meaning.
Yes, Finding Meaning, that he did create meaning out of the loss of his son. It's the same sort of thing. I think that's amazing. I also think it's amazing that you have friends that would look at your writing and say, hey, this is a book. You should do this. This is a book.
Yeah.
Everybody needs friends like that, right?
Absolutely.
So there's a quote from the book. And it says, so after we've exhausted the traditional 5 stages of grief and arrived at acceptance, even if we're in the darkest, coldest, loneliest emotional place imaginable, we must open ourselves to doing the work that will support a lifetime of grief. Work that will support a lifetime of grief. So what do you mean by working to support a lifetime of grief? That's a long time of grief.
I know, it is, isn't it?
Yes.
Gosh. It's always interesting to hear someone read back my own words. It's always a moment like I have to sit with that.
As long as you're saying, man, that was genius that I wrote that.
Yeah, right. I was yes. Like, oh my gosh, that's
so pithy and meaningful.
Right. So I guess, okay, Helen, I'll break it down. I think for me, because part of me wants to go back and like think of the Paula 6 years ago that probably wrote that. Like, where did that come from, right? Mm-hmm. And part of me wants to answer from the place I'm in now, which is, so fluid. So I think what I'll do is I want to break it down into 2 parts, because one is that maybe one speaks to the 5, 6, 7 years ago that I was, and one speaks to the now. So the 2 parts for me in that is the doing the work. So the part in there that says doing the work, and that is the person that was doing the work 6 years ago, or however long it's been. It'll be 7. No, yeah. Well, it'll be 12 years that I've lost Brandon this year, but 7 years ago. So I want to speak to doing the work. And then I'll speak to your question around like supporting this lifetime of grief, because then that's, I'm still here and I still grieve Brandon, and I never won't grieve him. And I never won't have feelings around that experience. So I think to speak to that first part around doing the work, whether we choose, and by nature, I am a very hopeful, future focused person. Like that's where I live my life. I live my life as where are the solutions? Where's the healing? Where's the hope? Like that's just my orientation, that's my true north. And so we're going to do the work. The work's going to happen, and it's going to be hard, and it's going to be painful, and it's going to be uncomfortable. And it's going to be hard, painful, and uncomfortable to stay in a dark place, because you have to keep reliving and you have to keep cultivating those hard feelings and the anger, the resentment, whatever those are. So you're going to work hard to stay in a negative place of grief, or you're going to do the work and you're going to work hard to get through to a place that's more comfortable. You're going to have to work. Like doing the work is not, like doing or not doing is not the option. It's how do you want to embrace the work? So, so early in my grief, I was angry. And I'll tell you, like, it was work. I had to go to Starbucks, Jerry and Helen, and be the angry customer that they expected me to be every morning. Like, wow. I would walk in and I was a horrible human being to them. And I talk about this in the book, that like, I think they saw me coming and they were like, oh God, put your helmet on. Like, here she comes. But it's work. It is work to be so angry. It's work to be so miserable. And it's work to find hope. And it's work to hold on to hope. It's work to hold on to anger. Like we're going to work no matter what. So when I say like, we must open ourselves to doing the work that will support a lifetime of grief. So we have to do the work. And we know that our grief is never going to go away, because as what I like to say is like grief and love are a pendulum, and the deeper the love, the deeper the grief, and we oftentimes live in the middle of that little pendulum, and it just barely swings, right? So the goldfish dies when you're in 2nd grade and you're just so, oh my God, it's so horrible. And you flush him down the toilet and you go play on the playground. There you go. Grief and love, like, there you go. Right. And then our relationships get more complex, and they get more textured, and they get more depth, and the pendulum swings, and we are so in love with our husband, our children, our parents, or whatever. And then when they die, that pendulum swings, right? So that pendulum is the lifetime, and we move through that pendulum up all the ups and downs, and all the way to one side, all the way to the other. And that's where doing the work supports the moments in the future. And I'll give you a really palpable example for me. My husband and I went to a wedding this fall, this beautiful wedding. It was a friend of my husband's, and it was in a winery in Oregon. I mean, it was just like one of these like picturesque, beautiful wedding. We were all dressed up, and we were at the reception, and the groom goes out on the floor. It's time for everyone to have their dances. I'll start crying just thinking of this moment. And his mom walks out. And like that boy got to dance with his mom.
Right.
I'll never have that with Brandon, And that's a lifetime of grief. Like that's what I'm talking about. But to sit and hold that, and even now to tell the story and to be able to hold that and hold myself in a way that says, this is my love. This is how much I adored this child. And this is my grief in this moment. That's what it looks like. It looks like another loss, right? It looks like losing that opportunity. But also the gift of thinking, I got to have that dream. I got to hold that. So that's the lifetime, is how do we do the work in a way that allows us to have those moments for the rest of our lives and hold them both, to let that pendulum swing and come back, and know, even in that swing of grief to love, there's that center that stays steady and stays calm and stays at peace.
Yeah, it's balance. That's the word that comes to me.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, and I think anyone who has experienced a loss knows what you're talking about. They understand that there are those moments in our lives where we think we have been able to move through our grief, but then something happens, like what happened at the wedding. And all of a sudden, it's like the grief is right there with us again, like it never left almost.
It's validating.
Yes.
Validate, and triggering, too, I guess would be the right word, too.
Triggering, yes. Yeah. And I think anyone who's had a loss can understand that. And so there really is this lifetime of grief that we're going to deal with that. And I love the way that you put it. If you do the work, then you will be able to work through that and support yourself through the lifetime of grief.
But I never thought of it as work if you sit in the negative space. I never thought of it that way. Mm-hmm. To me, that would be, you're not doing any work. You're just letting it stagnate, anger, resentment, guilt, that's easy to do. And really, it's not. That's a horrible way to sit and live and to conduct yourself in your relationships and your connections and all your actions and your thinking. But it's work to be that angry, resentful, guilty. I never thought about it that way.
So let's kind of change our direction for just a minute, if you don't mind. Let's talk about your work as a hospice chaplain. What do you find most meaningful about working with hospice teams who care for these seriously ill and dying patients? What's most meaningful to you about that?
As you guys know, I don't have to tell you that it really takes an extraordinary person to do this work day after day, and to know that the relationships that you develop with families, can be fleeting, meaning, if the person's going to die, the patient will die. And, so you're walking this fine line of like feeling connected and being in relationship with these people and knowing that it's very temporary. And so one of the things I started in adult hospice, and in a very short period of time, that organization developed a pediatric hospice. And so most of my work was with the pediatric team. And partly I was brought on because these were people like myself who were going to lose a child. And they weren't all children who death was imminent. A lot of them had just life-limiting illness, and it could be that they would live another 5 years, or it could be that they'd live, another 5 weeks. But so for me, I think when we would have our meetings and we would sit, and most of our team were young parents themselves or had children, and there was this sense of kind of knowing more intimately what was happening for these families, because they could sort of mirror it. They could see it in their own lives. And what became sort of the sacred moments were when we would have our IDGs or interdisciplinary team meetings, and someone would say, I really lost it at, John's house this week. And they would talk about how hard that was for them to go there or to have the experience they had, or they would see parents, making decisions that didn't feel compassionate or didn't seem to be honoring the children's lives. And to really hold those spaces for the staff, because it was in that processing that they were able to then go out and do their best work again, day after day after day. And so for me, there was just a real beauty in being a steady sort of presence in the meetings, because a lot of times the meetings became sort of a deep listening council and a deep listening session of not just going over, but really, and it was kind of like the before and the ending, right? We had like the meeting that was like the formal part of the meeting, but we'd sit down and it would be a little debrief of what happened. And so just being able to sit and just really hold the space for those stories, which are truly sacred stories. And, through the eyes of the healthcare worker, the hospice worker who's with those people. And I just found those moments to be so precious.
I think a lot of people don't realize that the role of the hospice chaplain also includes supporting the team, which gives an additional layer to the work that they do, because a lot of times they're also providing bedside care, right? In addition to their own compassion fatigue that they might be experiencing, they're also supposed to provide care for their coworkers. And I'm not talking about, one-on-one personal counseling. That's not what they do. Your chaplain is not your personal therapist, but to provide care for the mindset and the heart of the team and where they are as a group. That's so important. And it's part of the responsibility. It's in the job description.
It is in the job description.
Yeah.
When I'm training a new chaplain, one of the things that I go over with them is, you have a responsibility to be supportive of your team and being there for them, providing moments to debrief when there's been a very difficult situation with a patient and a unit of care. So that's part of your job, is to be there to support your team.
Yeah. And I guess we all do it. Everybody who's part of an interdisciplinary team is responsible for, I think anyway, responsible for the health of their team members, to act with compassion and support, with a recognition and an intricate understanding of what it means to experience that kind of secondary traumatic stress. Because you've been there, you know what that's like. So today it's my turn, tomorrow it's your turn. We take care of each other. But that's what the chaplains do. And I think it's good for our listeners to hear that. It is an additional responsibility. And it's one of the ways that interdisciplinary teams that work with seriously ill and dying patients get through the week. If we didn't have our chaplains to lean on, we would just all end up on the floor all the time. I don't know how we would do it.
Can I just add a little piece here that I want to kind of maybe stitch together a connection of, in the book that I wrote, one of the things that came out for me was what I called, in the book, I call it creating connection. And I refer to it as like-loss community. In the grieving world, what I talk about like-loss is you find your people who most closely resemble or mirror your experience, because they will most easily be able to support that experience. So, for example, if someone dies by suicide, being in a community of people who also experience that type of a loss can oftentimes feel more supportive. So finding your people, your like-loss community, that connection. And the same thing I would say true is in healthcare, is that when I sit in my community of hospice workers, that's my like community. And when I say what it was like to watch the family experience the death or watch them struggle with hard end of life decisions, I can sit like you, the three of us, Jerry and Helen, we could sit and have a conversation And you could really deepen into what I was saying because we have those shared experience,
right,
as opposed to me as the healthcare worker going out to, let's say we go out for a beer with my friends, and one of my friends is an accountant and another one, works in sales. They may be like, oh yeah, that sounds really hard. Can't you just tell them to get over it? So, right? Right. You know what I'm saying, right? So I think there's something really important here to notice where we're getting our support from. Are we creating these communities of connection that really, it's a one-to-one connection, not I'm trying to connect through some other way, right? So that's kind of, I guess, part of talking about what healthcare does is leaning on those people who have those shared connections.
I like that. That's very insightful, I think, to consider that. And I think we should know by observation that that's the case, but we don't always make that connection like you're talking about. And it's true. We tend to gravitate towards those people who we know will have an understanding. Oh, I know exactly what you're talking about, we'll say to each other, because we've been there, we've experienced it. So yeah, it's really good to do that.
We're excited to share a great educational opportunity with you. The California Hospice and Palliative Care Association is holding its annual conference coming up in June of 2022. It's going to be on the beautiful campus of Chapman University in Orange, California. The conference starts with an LNEC communication curriculum on Monday and Tuesday, June 6th and 7th, followed by the annual conference and exposition Wednesday through Friday, June 8th through the 10th. The theme for this year's conference is Back to the Basics at the Bedside. You'll hear information on the basic principles of the pillars of quality hospice care taught by experts in the end-of-life industry. This is a great opportunity to get those continuing education units and to reset your focus on what's really important in patient care. Early registration is open until April 1st, so visit the CHAPCA website at calhospice.org to register and tell them you heard about it on the Heart of Hospice podcast. Our sponsor today is Hospice of Southern Maine. Hospice of Southern Maine makes it their mission to provide compassion, care, and comfort for people with a life-limiting illness and support for their families in the comfort of the patient's home or at Gosnell Memorial Hospice House, a home-like setting featuring 18 private rooms and 24/7 care. Hospice of Southern Maine is proud to present the Thresholds Conference coming up in May of 2022. The conference provides the opportunity for families, friends, healthcare professionals, and caregivers worldwide to participate in meaningful conversations with recognized leaders in end-of-life care. This year's theme is Grief is Individual and Universal. The 2022 Thresholds Conference features #1 New York Times best-selling author of Eat, Pray, Love, Elizabeth Gilbert, along with Grammy nominee singer-songwriter Michelle Zauner, author of Crying in H Mart. This year's conference focuses on grief, understanding that while grief is universal, it's highly individualized and no two people grieve alike. For only $35, you won't want to miss the Thresholds Conference on Tuesday, May 10th from 1 p.m. to 3:30 p.m. Eastern Time. Register at hospiceofsouthernmaine.org and click on Events. You can also follow Hospice of Southern Maine on Facebook and Instagram. Now back to today's episode.
Now you come to chaplaincy with a very unique background.
At least in our experience.
At least in our experience here in Texas. How does your Buddhist background shape the way that you provide spiritual care?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I'll tell you, in my experience, being a Buddhist in spiritual care is unusual. So I was raised Christian and then found after Brandon's death, I should, say as soon as I started doing yoga, which was 20 plus years ago, yoga has its histories in Indian traditions. And so there's some yoga flavor or Buddhist flavor in that. And so there was kind of this slow shift in my life. But I guess, for me, as a practicing Buddhist, what really supports my work as a chaplain and how my Buddhist practice supports that is really kind of three things: mindfulness, impermanence, and joy. I think that really grounds me. So if we talk about mindfulness, it's being in that moment. It's being right here with you guys and not letting my mind wander into, what I'm going to do after this or what's going to happen, but just really like sitting here and feeling how good it is to be in conversation with you and feel how good it is to have this connection and this beautiful conversation that's unfolding. Like mindfulness is just being here without any other agenda. And so that's, when I go into spiritual care, like that really grounds what I do with a patient, with a family, with staff is, can I just show up here with no agenda and just see what's unfolding and work with that, like really not knowing what's going to happen and just mindfully allowing the next thing to unfold. So there's that mindfulness piece of really just dropping in. And that, I say to myself a lot, and I say this, when I teach mindfulness, I say, the practice of saying to yourself, there's nowhere else to be and nothing else to do. Just this.
That's good.
Nowhere else to be, nothing else to do, just this. And it just reminds us, just this. And it's so simple, right? So there's that piece. And then the impermanence. A big part of Buddhist practice is, the impermanence. And I think that for a lot of people, well, if everything's impermanent, then what does it matter? Like, who cares? It doesn't matter. But that's what brings the joy in, is that we oftentimes say, well, this too shall pass, right? And we almost 90% of the time people say that as a reference to something negative happening, right?
Right.
Oh, this too shall pass. But the truth is, this moment of joy, this moment of happiness, this laughter, this too shall pass. That makes it all the more precious. When I sit here and I hear the laughter in your voice, or I can hear the smile coming across your face, how precious is that moment? Because it's going to pass. And there's something that we practice in Buddhism called sympathetic joy. And it's part of a cluster of 4 practices. And sympathetic joy is probably the number one practice in my life that grounds me. And sympathetic joy, it's really hard in our culture because our culture wants to be better than and get a leg up and this competitive spirit. So it makes practicing sympathetic joy a little bit difficult. But sympathetic joy is finding happiness and joy kind of like by borrowing it from someone else, or vicarious joy would be another way of saying this, right? And for me, that was a real shift in my own grief experience. Was I remember sitting at a stoplight one day, and I told you, I was like the epitome of this angry person. And I was sitting there, and at the stoplight over on the other, across the street was this playground, and there was these kids playing, and they were so joyful and happy, and they were completely carefree. And this one little boy was chasing the other little boy up the stairs, and he'd go down the slide and he'd run around. And all of a sudden I found myself sitting there and smiling. And I was so caught off guard, but I had borrowed their joy, right? I had bought into that experience. And honestly, no one was more surprised than myself. I was like, holy cow, yeah, I should show Starbucks that I actually can have this smile. So this practice of sympathetic joy is so powerful because I can say, gosh, that person is happy just like me, just like I want to be. And I know what it's like to be happy. Instead of being like, oh, those jerks, they're just laughing and having a good time. And how could they? My life is crumbling. How inconsiderate. Or I can say, I remember what it feels like to be happy. I know what it's like to laugh when you're sitting in a coffee shop and you're with a friend. And that's one of my practices is when I go into a coffee shop, I'll watch the people engage with one another and just watch how they're just loving that connection. And so, these are kind of the core practices that I pull from my Buddhist tradition that, just being mindful, being in the moment, and knowing that this moment is going to pass, whether it's good or bad, that impermanence, and then knowing that the joy is so precious because it too is going to pass.
Wow, that's powerful. I love that.
I feel like I'm in a therapy session just for me. We're going to have to talk offline. I like this. Oh, man. Was that the end of the interview? Because that is sympathetic joy. I like it.
We all use a little sympathetic joy.
We could.
Couldn't we?
We could.
Okay. All right. So,
All right, so
now we have to pull ourselves together.
Back on track now. What have you found are the biggest barriers to patients' acceptance of the spiritual counselor or chaplain in hospice care? Because we all experience this where patients or families will say, oh, we don't need a chaplain, or we don't want a chaplain, period. What do you think are some of the biggest barriers to that?
So in my experience, the number one barrier is typically around past experiences with people in the role of spiritual authority, particularly if they have a negative association with that. They don't want to go back to that. If they, either had religion pushed onto them, in their family of origin, or they had a negative experience with religion. So in my experience, it's them saying, this is going to be just like what happened, fill in the blank. When I was younger, when I got divorced and the priest said I shouldn't have, bad people get, like whatever it is, whatever their experiences with spiritual authority. And so that would be the number one. And then the second thing is we live in a culture that's moving more towards people who identify as spiritual, but not religious.
Right.
And, and I think we're going to see this as these older generations who their spirituality was in the context of religion in a much more traditional sense. They kind of want that traditional religious role. But as things shift culturally, I think that how chaplains are described or presented or explained needs to be more around, this is not religious care, but this is spiritual care, which means meaning making, which means understanding our human experience, which means connecting to something deeper than ourselves, something bigger than ourselves. And those are kind of the pillars of what spiritual care really provides is, can we help you make meaning? Can we help you maybe understand this experience in a different way? So really, the number one barrier I think is past experiences that weren't supportive or helpful, made people feel judged or less than. And then two, just have people understand that it's not religious care, it's person care. And so a lot of times the word that I use is whole person care. You have your social worker, that's your, kind of intellectual management of your thing. And you have your nursing, which is, the medical care. Whole person care is mind, body, spirit. We're looking at all of it. You have to put all of those pieces together. And sometimes the medical piece is the most important. Sometimes the spiritual piece is the most important because people are saying, but isn't there hope, or isn't there something else we can do? And the medical staff is like, no. And so then the spiritual person can come in and work with what that experience is.
Sometimes I think the nurses, and maybe you can speak to this too, Paula, I think the nurses get in the way of the chaplains sometimes. Because I think a lot of nurses that work in hospice, that work in end-of-life care, are spiritual people. They're people of faith, whether it's religious faith or spiritual faith, however you define that for yourself. I think a lot of times that, first of all, we don't have a good understanding of what the chaplain can provide, what spiritual counseling really looks like. And if the family says, well, no, we just want the nurse. We just want the nurse and the social worker. Then the nurse says, okay, and, I can pray with you if you want me to. I really do. I've seen it so many times, and I think I've done it myself in the past before I had a really good understanding of the role of the spiritual counselor in hospice, was to provide some of that spiritual care myself. Get out of my own lane, right? We've all done it, right? We've all, if you got a chaplain that says that looks like it needs an antibiotic, that is not your lane. Don't do it. But I think nurses do that. Right? We are the end all be all. You can go without every discipline on the hospice team, but you'll never get away from having that nurse, right? So we can do it all. It's one-stop shop. We can do it all for you. So we're going to pray and do whatever else you need. I do sometimes think that the nurses trip up the family when it comes to allowing that whole person care, because we want to do the whole person ourselves. Would you say that, Mike? She's nodding. Would you say that's an accurate statement?
Yes, I would.
Yeah, she's being very respectful. I like that.
She's going to be political here.
Yes, I like it. It's very correct.
Let me say a little bit more, though. So I think that one of the things, so a good chaplain will be able to meet someone regardless of their spirituality, religion. I mean, my favorite people were so I worked in a hospital for a while, and I'd walk in and they'd go, "Who are you?" And I'd say, "Well, I'm part of the spiritual care team," which actually it would say chaplain on my badge. And they'd go, "Yeah, I don't want to talk about God." Yeah. And I'd go, "Good. I don't either."
Right.
These conversations are not about God. And so I think that when we have these, like I was saying, the good chaplain is able to talk the language of many, many disciplines, whether it's, Catholic, Protestant, evangelical, all the things, right. Buddhism, spiritual, but not religious. So I think there's, what I would say to nurses who feel that burden of having to be all those things, and that must feel like a heavy load to carry, is to not be afraid to say, man, we have somebody on our team who is so good at listening to these kind of things. And let me see if they want to come in, But I also see that oftentimes, and you said it so well, Helen, you can get rid of everyone except the nurse, and the families really feel connected to the nurses and they trust the nurses. So when that trust develops, that is the best time for that nurse to say, man, you trust what I'm going to say. And I'm telling you that the chaplain, you could say the spiritual care person, right, or the whole person care, our staff member for that, is really great at listening, or really great at working through some of these tough questions. So yeah,
that's good.
Yeah, that's a good way of thinking about it. I hope we've got some hospice nurses listening.
And I hope we have some hospice chaplains listening as well. That's really good. So with the pandemic now still around, hanging around for, this is now 2 years, how has your self-care evolved? Let's put it that way, over the past couple of years during the pandemic. For
devolved?
Me,
is that what you said?
No, evolved. Because I know that for me, it's been a challenge to really practice good self-care these last few years. So how has it changed, and what did you learn about yourself when it came to your self-care?
Man, that is such a good question. And I see what you did there, Helen, with the evolve versus devolve.
I'm just saying.
I know. Well, and hasn't it been? I would say that most of us had the experience of self-care just plummeting and bottoming out, and then trying to find our way back out, right? So a lot of the skills, habits, behaviors that we were doing for self-care could be going to the gym. Well, then the gym closes. Are you actually motivated to work out when you're on video again in your basement? Probably not for some people, because what we learned is maybe going to the gym was also a social connection, right? It was a way. So I think there was a lot of everything crashed. We had to sort of relearn and maybe even get really curious about, why am I doing this, or what's important to me? And I'm no different. The one thing I had going for me is that, again, back to that wellness background, that whole person wellness background, it's very much a part of my life. It's just a lot of behaviors and habits around eating well and exercise. Okay, so those are only two of a lot of ways we can self-care. And I don't want to lean too heavily into either one of those, because I think that can kind of get muddy. But those were, kind of solid for me in a way, but even those became difficult. And so for me, I think the number one thing that has helped me in the last 2 years, what I've gotten curious about and what I've had to learn a lot about, is self-compassion. Letting myself off the hook, and not holding myself to a different standard than I'm holding everyone else. So not saying, Helen, it's okay if you're not, eating right, if you're having macaroni and cheese at breakfast, lunch, dinner, it's okay. You don't worry about that, right? I know, right? You're and then saying to myself, God, you're a horrible person for having macaroni and cheese for breakfast again today. Like, oh my gosh, you're horrible. I wouldn't say that to you. Then why am I saying that to myself?
Exactly.
Right?
Yes.
And that's being in integrity, internal and external integrity. That if I wouldn't say that outwardly to someone else, I shouldn't say it to myself inwardly.
Right.
And so self-compassion and really dialing in, what does it mean to be kind to myself? And how does that look different in moment-to-moment experience? And I think one of the things is how we, that difference between like what I expect of myself and what I expect of someone else. And then looking at that as this is common humanity. If I'm feeling angry, if I'm feeling hurt, if I'm feeling not seen, if I'm feeling overworked, burnt out, self-care, self-compassion says that's a human experience. I'm not alone. I bet there's other people that feel this way, and it's okay to feel this way and to be aware of that feeling. And so, to answer your question, like the short answer would be taking a step back from myself and looking at where I am super compassionate and kind and loving and caring to other people, and I'm not treating myself the same way.
Jerry and I had somewhat the same experience, and he started saying something to me that I found very startling, and at first a little bit rude, but it worked like a charm. I was extremely negative about my self-care, my eating, which talk about devolve, right? Oh, horrible. I got the pandemic 15 going, and I was really down on myself, critical, judgmental about my eating habits. And he said to me, "Don't talk to me like that." I'm like, "What are you talking about? I'm not talking to you about that. I would never say those things to you, ever. I would never judge you for what you eat. I would always encourage you to do a better job, but I would never talk to you like that." And he said, "Then why in the world would you talk to yourself like that?"
Yeah. And then the light dawned.
Yeah, it took me a minute, that light bulb. But sometimes, just to shake yourself up a little bit and realize, at least for me, to realize that this critical finger pointing, judgmental attitude, that is self-deprecation. It just feeds back on itself, which just makes me want to eat the mac and cheese. It's never helpful, never helpful. So it was a little bit of an attitude check that worked really well for me. Mm-hmm. It was mean.
Did I apologize? I'm not sure if I ever did.
It's too late now.
So Paula, one last question that we want to throw out to you, and this would be a good way to end, I think. What encouragement would you offer to hospice chaplains, and even for that matter, the other IDT members, in this time where there is so much change and so much stress? What encouragement would you offer to us as hospice providers?
What a good question to end on. I think, since we're kind of in this topic of self-care, I'm just going to kind of pull from that a little bit. I think it's more important than ever that we reframe and reevaluate what we consider self-care and how we see self-care. Because traditionally we look at self-care as, I'm going to go get a massage. I'm going to go away for the weekend. I'm going to go out for wine with my girlfriends. But the reality is in the world that we're living right now, when staffing is at its lowest level, expectations are at their highest level, there is nothing more important than learning how to, what I call microdose our self-care. Because when I'm sitting with a patient and I all of a sudden realize like how tired and how fatigued, maybe I'm hungry and I haven't eaten, I can't be like, "Hey, patient, I'm going to go get a massage and I'll be back in a couple hours," right? That isn't, but what can I do in the moment that really soothes me? And that's learning to microdose. And microdose is noticing I'm with that patient and saying, "Oh, I'm really hungry." Like, and note that now I'm not even with the patient. Now I'm thinking about my macaroni and cheese I'm going to have for lunch, right? Back to that. It's a thing for me. And so I leave and I say, how in this moment can I fill this need? And maybe it's saying to my colleague, my coworker, saying, "I need 1 minute to just go grab something to eat." or maybe it's, I'm going to go grab a drink of water or something. Like, so there's things we can do that are microdose. Like we can drink a little bit more water. We can rest our feet. We can put our hands on our heart and just notice the feeling of tiredness, fatigue, sadness that's coming up, and just be with that. So I would say, like, really learning to microdose our self-care and not make it a big deal. Like, we need to not glamorize self-care. I think that's how it's been historically is I'm going to go away. I'm going to get a massage. I'm going to drink wine. I'm going to watch movies all weekend. Like, and that's kind of glamorizing it. And it's not making it accessible. So there's a lot of people, healthcare workers in particular, that are working 12-hour shifts. And you know what? Telling them to go, get off your shift and go have a bath and put some essential oils in there. Like, no, they're going to go home. They're going to take care of the kids. They're going to fix their lunches for the next day. They're going to, do kids' home. They're going to do 1,000 other things except that.
Right.
So we need to make self-care something that is accessible to everyone and can be in the moment care, not after the fact care. Right. And then I'll close with this. One of the things I learned from Roshi Joan Halifax, who's my Buddhist teacher, is the grace model. I don't know if you guys are familiar with the grace model, but it starts with gathering your attention. That's the G. Recalling your intention. So I recall, why am I doing this work? And then I attune to myself and the other person. So I gather, I recall, I attune, right? And then I consider what will serve, right? So what can I do in this moment? I do that thing, I engage and I end. And knowing that sort of working with grace allows someone to be in the moment, to do what they're there to do, to be mindful, and then stop that, like be done with that interaction. And now what do I need? And then they don't carry that forward with them. They end it. Right? So I'm not going in the next patient's room. I'm not going into a meeting or a staffing being angry or being upset or being sad. To me, the grace model and just that being able to engage and end and attuning to my own needs helps us microdose that self-care. If I attune to myself and I find out, wow, feeling really distracted, feeling really sad, I'm feeling really anxious, that I can work with. But if I don't take that moment to attune to my own needs, I'm probably not going to provide great staff care or patient care.
That's a great encouragement that is perfect ending. Let's just put it that way. It's a perfect ending to this interview. Paula, this has been so good. We could spend another hour talking about all this with you. Thank you for taking the time out of your day to talk to us and to share with our listeners as well.
And tell our listeners where they can connect with you and where they can buy your book.
Yes. So you can buy the book on Amazon. It's called From Grief to Growth, 5 Elements. It's under my name, Paula Stephens, with a PH, STEPHENS. So just go to Amazon. That's the easiest way to do it. And then as far as finding me, PaulaStephensCoaching.com. So PaulaStephensCoaching.com. So I have pivoted my work a little bit to doing more independent work. I have found one of the things for me that's unfolded in the last year with the pandemic and shifting in healthcare is that I can actually be more impactful and be of greater service from outside the system than inside the system. So, which really kind of gives me the autonomy to do the work that really lights me up.
Wonderful. And we'll have links to your website and to the book in our show notes. So listeners, you'll be able to connect with Paula and her book very easily.
Awesome. Thank you both so much. This has been such a joy and such a beautiful gift for me. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so energy, flow, aura, chakra. I don't know. What do you call it?
It's just good all the way around.
When we were kids, I'm probably dating myself. We would have said she was neat.
She was what?
Neat. She's neat.
Oh, she's
cool.
Neat. Yeah, cool. We are dating ourselves, aren't we?
Definitely. But she's an interesting person. I love her depth. And I absolutely have to say how much I admire and respect the meaning she has created from the loss of her son.
Yes, definitely. And very open and honest about her responses to it. And, she says early on, she was the person that the people at Starbucks hated to see walk in.
Right. She was the quintessential angry person.
Exactly. Yeah. And then there was this, what was the term she used? Sympathetic joy.
Sympathetic joy.
Oh, I love that.
Isn't that awesome?
It is. We see it all the time. I mean, you cannot help but watch a video of a baby laughing.
Exactly.
And not find yourself just overwhelmed with this joy because the baby is having so much fun and just laughing. And it's the same way with our own responses. How great it is that when we ourselves express joy, it helps somebody else.
So where do you find sympathetic joy? Where would that present itself to you? Because I have a great example already. I already know.
We'll go ahead, because I honestly don't know that I could come up with one right off the top of my head.
The thing that comes to my mind is when I see a child, a little girl, that, new shoes. They have sparkles, or they light up when you run, or they have stars on them, or they're just cool colors, or anything like that. And I look at that child, and half the time they can't just plain old walk, right? You have to run, or you have to jump, because it makes them light up, or they sparkle. And if you look down while you walk, you can see the glitter, how pretty it is.
Right.
And I think that little baby is enjoying the heck out of those shoes. Look at those cute shoes. And they smile, and that makes me smile. And with my two grandbabies, I get sympathetic joy. There's no better place to find sympathetic joy than from a baby.
Yeah, this is true.
Because they have joy all the time. What do they know from anything else?
Yeah, you just make a funny face at them and they're going to laugh. And it's just awesome that they have so much joy. So that really makes me wonder too, why can't we create our own reflective joy? Why can't we have that joy? Even if it's something just as simple as smiling at someone and saying hello. Can it happen that way? That simply?
She was talking about that experience she had of going to that wedding and watching the son dance with his mother and having the grief well up. It was one of those waves of grief that hit as she thought, I can't have that with my son.
Mm-hmm.
And I think sympathetic joy is about identifying the fact that this is a source of joy for someone else. And maybe it will never be your source of joy. But instead of embracing envy, grief, sadness, you can identify this is not mine, but I can still have joy on your behalf.
Absolutely. So we would recommend that you take the opportunity to read her book, From Grief to Growth, 5 Essential Elements of Action to Give Grief a Purpose and Grow from Your Experience. She wrote this book about 6 years ago, but it's still in print and still something that would be valuable for anyone to read. We would certainly recommend her book. And we would also recommend that you go to her website, and it's just simply paulastephens.net.
And you can find the book From Grief to Growth on Amazon. And also there's a page for the book on paulastephens.net. And it is Paula Stephens, STEPHENS.net.
Thanks for listening to The Heart of Hospice. I'm Jerry Finter here with Helen Bauer. Because we know your hospice journey is 24/7, you can always find us at theheartofhospice.com. Subscribe to the podcasts wherever you're listening and leave a rating or a review on Apple Podcasts.
To connect with us, just send us an email at host@theheartofhospice.com. You can also find us on social media. And remember, no matter who you are or where you are in your hospice journey, you are the heart of hospice.